Israel, the land of holy shrines, is seen by Ralph and Irma Rothert, March 4th through the 13th, 1994. Let's start our journey through the Holy Land of Israel by taking the Jericho Road. Jericho is one of the oldest places of human habitation known to man. It was a city built about 12,000 years ago by Neolithic man. Jericho was besieged, attacked, and destroyed many times. It was rebuilt at various locations, but always near the spring of Elisha. Water found in this oasis is essential for desert life. Modern Jericho is situated below one of the most ancient sites. John the Baptizer is believed to have operated around Jericho. A stone tower built over 10,000 years ago still stands. Another very ancient city, Har Megiddo, was settled about 6,000 years ago. It was an important site at the mouth of the Wadi Ara, an important trade route. It was a walled city. Its water supply was outside of the wall around the city, so a tunnel was built under the wall in order to tap this natural source. This tunnel still remains. John, in Revelations, states that the final battle between good and evil will be fought here on the fertile plain of Armageddon. Archaeological expeditions have been and are still at work at many sites in Israel. Israel is part of the Fertile Crescent, which is often considered to be the cradle of man. Roman influence in Israel has been extensive. Rome ordered a count of the Israelites, hence Mary and Joseph journeyed to Bethlehem to be counted. The traditional birthplace of Jesus is today marked by a church. No evidence of a cave stable remains. Shepherds still watch their flocks on the nearby hills. This is the traditional place where Mary delivered the baby. The Holy Family, having been warned by an angel to leave Israel, returned after the death of Herod to Mary's hometown, Nazareth, north of Jerusalem. An ancient mosaic floor of an older temple is still visible at the birthing site. The Church of the Annunciation, where Mary was told of her forthcoming child, stands over the traditional site of Mary and Joseph's house in Nazareth. Opposite the Church of the Annunciation stands the Church of St. Joseph, above Joseph's carpenter shop. During the time when Jesus was growing into manhood, about 20 AD, Herod Antipas built the town of Tiberias on the Sea of Galilee. 5 synagogues were built at this particular site.
No water for him.
Being built in honor of the Roman Emperor Tiberius, a Roman theater was built here. It contained a plaque dedicating the theater to the emperor. One of the reasons for building the city here is the presence of sulfur hot springs. Some people believe them to have therapeutic value. The Great Rift of Africa extends north through Israel and is responsible for the Jordan Valley, the Dead Sea, and the hot springs of Tiberias. The advent of the Romans into Israel brought many changes in the land as the Romans built theaters, palaces, temples, roads, fortifications, and aqueducts. The ruins of Tiberias, Acco, and Megiddo are some examples of Roman development. North of Tiberias is Capernaum, the center of much of Jesus' ministry. The gardens of modern Capernaum welcome a visitor to this place. It was in Capernaum that Jesus probably lived during much of his ministry.
On your feet! Get them going! You there! Back to your place! Over and you!
He had to make his home somewhere. It was probably with Peter and Peter's family. Peter's home is well documented. The early Christians built an octagonal church over it so they would not forget its location. That church has been a permanent marker. The White Synagogue, built during the 4th century AD, is Jewish. It was erected to protect the location of an earlier synagogue. It is considered the most beautiful synagogue in all Israel. It was at this site that Jesus often taught. The yellow mustard plants growing wild around Capernaum were probably here when Jesus told the parable of the mustard seed. The houses, built of heavy stone, usually had their roofs made of reeds, mud, and poles. Thus it was easy to make a hole in the roof of Peter's house to lower the crippled man because of the crush of people outside the house. Peter's house probably had a large courtyard before it, for we are told that all the people of the city gathered before the house. Such a courtyard was also the place where much of the daily work of the house was done. Grain was ground, food was prepared and cooked, weaving and sewing was done here. Olives were taken to a central large olive press. Olive oil was used for cooking, in oil lamps, and various religious needs. A few miles east of Jericho flows the Jordan River. This is probably near the spot where John baptized Jesus. This is near the spot where Joshua caused the Jordan River to be parted to allow the Israelites to cross over it into the Jordan Valley.
I renew your commitment to Lord Jesus Christ in the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit.
It was near Capernaum that Jesus taught the multitude on the mountainside. The feeding of the 5,000 may have taken place in this natural amphitheater, overlooking the Sea of Galilee. Boats similar to those used by the disciples are still used on the Sea of Galilee. In fact, it was probably in such a boat that Jesus was in when he calmed the sea. It was here that the Beatitudes were set forth. Peter's ordination took place on the shore of the Sea of Galilee as the group sat around a fire eating fish caught that day. Perhaps it was here that Jesus told the men to cast their nets on the other side of the boat. In time, Jesus decided to go to Jerusalem. It was on this trip that he met Zacchaeus, who climbed into a sycamore tree so he could see Jesus better, as the crowd around Jesus was too great for Zacchaeus, a man of short stature, to see him. Arriving in Jerusalem, Jesus and the disciples immediately entered by means of the sheep gate. Near the gate were the pools of Bethesda, where the sick and lame would gather in an effort to be healed of their afflictions when the pools became troubled. Most of the temple is gone today. Only the western or wailing wall remains. Jesus was busy teaching in the temple by day. At night he and the disciples went to Bethany and to the Mount of Olives or the Garden of Gethsemane. Ancient olive trees that may have been there when Jesus visited the garden are still alive and bearing fruit today. The symbolic upper room where the Passover feast was eaten has today breadcrumbs carved into the rocks, as well as grapevines representing Jesus' blood and body. These were put there at a much later time. The actual location of the upper room is not known today. It was in this vicinity. During the last week of life, Jesus was taken to the condemnation and flagellation site.
To us, a recent tradition is 12th or 13th century. Catholic pilgrims that were coming to Israel, to the Holy Land, walking along the streets of Jerusalem, wanted to feel what Jesus felt in the last moment or the last 3 or 4 hours of his tour. Now, first, they were reading the scriptures and mentioning what happened. Second, they gave numbers to events. And in no time, these numbers were given the title stations, and there were 14 stations along the painful road of Jesus carrying the cross from the place he was condemned to death to the place he was crucified and buried. And the stations are, A, condemnation and flagellation. Second, as we'll walk out, and I'll take you into another place, and there, ladies and gentlemen, I'll take you down to the level of Jerusalem of 2,000 years ago. Here we are, contemporary Jerusalem. You may step ahead and see the crown of thorns that decorated the ceiling with mosaics. The crown of thorns.
Schedule. Things will not.
The soldiers may have cast lots for his garments at this spot. The level of the ground 2,000 years ago was about 50 feet below modern Jerusalem ground level. Jesus collapsed under the cross near here.
Cross station.
This shrine commemorates the site of the crucifixion. His body may have been laid on this slab or rock for his anointing. Just outside the walls of Jerusalem is the garden tomb. Matthew reports in the 27th chapter, the 32nd and 33rd verses, as they went out of the city, they came to a place called Golgotha, which means the place of the skull. It is translated by some scholars as to mean the place of the bones or the place of stones. This may have been the place where Stephen was stoned. Here Jesus was crucified. Nearby in this garden was a tomb in which no man had yet lain. Joseph of Arimathea had Jesus' body placed in this tomb. He then rolled a great stone before it to keep thieves out. The stone is now missing. In Jesus' time, bodies were not embalmed. The catacomb where the body was put often had a vent so the gases and fumes produced by the decaying body could escape. Spices were wrapped in with the shroud used to cover the body in an effort to destroy the foul odors. Jewish bodies are often not embalmed today, being buried on the same day of death. Herod's family tomb has such a stone before it. Soon after Jesus' death, the Romans began to take over the entire country. City after city came under Roman rule. Finally, Jerusalem was conquered by the Romans. However, some of the Jews escaped to the south. The Essenes removed themselves to the lowest place on the face of the earth, to Qumran. Here they lived in seclusion and in time hid their sacred scriptures in earthen jars in the surrounding caves. These are today referred to as the Dead Sea Scrolls. It is believed that the people lived in the caves on the hillsides. The priests lived in the village below the hills. Today, the scrolls are housed in a special building in Jerusalem. Another group left Jerusalem and fled south into the desert. Here they ascended to the top of a butte known as Masada, meaning a high place. King Herod had built a fortification up here a few years earlier. They successfully held off the Romans for about 3 years before all hope was gone. At that point, all of them committed suicide rather than become Roman slaves, as the Jews wished to die as free people. A Jewish synagogue is still partially standing on Masada. The Roman fortifications are still easily seen in the form of large squares on the valley below Masada. Most of Israel's fertile land lies north of Jerusalem. Hence, most of her cities are also there. Akko is Israel's only good deep-sea harbor. A sort of cove connected with Haifa gives it a bit of protection from the sea. The port was improved by the British during World War I. During the 12th century, the town of the Crusades, Akko, became an important jumping-off point for the Crusaders. They built much of the construction still standing today. This includes the old wall, castle, and countless homes. The old wall around Akko still stands. Water is heated by means of solar water heaters throughout Israel. They are found on nearly all homes. Wars have often come to this land. Enemies are still here, as witnessed by the Syrian gun and Lebanese armored car and troops. The Golan Heights are well fortified all around. Throughout Israel are kibbutzes, places of communal living. Many of these were started by immigrants. About 200 people live in each of these communes. These kibbutzes have bomb shelters as part of their communities. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob probably lived as Bedouins in the desert regions, tending their flocks of sheep and goats, just as the Bedouins still do today. Camels were common animals, along with sheep and goats that were owned by the Hebrew people. Today, life goes on in this troubled land. They go to market, dance, and sing, work, and so forth.
Is it okay?
I didn't get
Amish, do it! Amish, do it! Abbas Kalim, Kusadeh Motai. Yalla, 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 Abbas Kalim, Abbas Kalim.
The national dance of Israel, the Hora, is still being danced. The International Diamond Center of Jerusalem is again a world institution. Numerous swampy areas with reeds are found along the Jordan River. The reeds were used for house roofing. The wild mustard growing in quantities was the topic of one of Jesus' parables. The common method of burial was then, and still to some extent is, in catacombs. After a certain number of years, the bones of the dead are removed and placed into a small container so the main burial site can be reused. This is especially true in Jerusalem, where burial sites are limited. Muslim mosques dot the countryside. A swim in the Dead Sea is a unique experience. This Holocaust memorial is dedicated to all the cities who lost Jewish lives due to the Germans. Israel has built excellent memorials commemorating the Holocaust, including this rail car used to transport Jews to various camps. A steel monument representing bones is nearby. Eventually, everyone must eat. Overall is the most holy city in the world, the holy city of Jerusalem, home to three of the world's great religions, Muslim, Hebrew, and Christian.